This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, universe! It's your boy back with another episode of A Lost Plot. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, here with our great guest back again. Hello and welcome, Avalon.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa, and leho.
We're going to review a semi-oddly recent release, a release on Netflix and a limited release in theaters a couple weeks ago, Leave the World Behind. But before we get into that, just wanted to say a quick nod to some of our listeners. Now, we really appreciate those reviews you guys are bringing in for us. It makes a big difference for the pod. We had the note from Big Boy 354 was his handle on the podcast app, where he left us a review that was talking about how he appreciates we break down from the beginning to the end. Our show dissects the true motives and hidden character development for these famous movies. Great show. So thank you, Big Boy 354, whoever you actually are. We appreciate your support. If you want to leave us a review, we're always looking for those. Find us at the bottom of your podcast app on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you're finding us. Leave us a review. We really appreciate it. On to the actual content of today. Leave the World Behind was written by Sam Esmail and Rumen Alam. It is directed by Sam Esmail and stars Julia Roberts as Amanda Sanford, Ethan Hawke as Clay Sanford, Mahershala Ali as G.H. Scott, and more. But before we get into the details, Avalon, how did you rate Leave the World Behind?
Well, my rating ends up being about 4.05.
Okay, there you go. I was very curious. I know we ended up watching this one together, and he was very heated when we finished this movie. My rating was at a 4.25, so pretty close on this one. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to see exactly how we ended on this, but we'll of course get into it. Now, one thing I will say, I'm not sure how Avalon is planning to discuss this movie. It's hard to ignore spoilers. If you are planning on watching this movie, I would not listen to the rest of this podcast before watching it, because there will be spoilers for sure. Avalon, would you say this movie is worth a watch? Or would you just say, go ahead and listen to the review and move on?
I mean, it depends on your personality. I mean, I think there's interesting things about this movie, but I don't know if it deserves a watch per se. I'm still conflicted about certain things I saw in this movie. So there are some interesting things they did in this movie, which I appreciated, but there are things in this movie that just did not make any sense, and I just torqued me off. I was like, okay. It was one of those things, yeah. Like, I'm conflicted, so I'm really not sure whether I'd recommend this movie to anyone or not. It's like, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great in my book.
Sounds fair. So you want to give the audience a summary of this movie?
Yeah, so Leave the World Behind is about a family who decide to make it's like almost a spur of the moment, like, vacation, where it's like, and it's not clear how long the vacation is supposed to be, like maybe a few days, a day, or something like that. But it's clearly spur of the moment. They go out to this rental home, that's supposed to be like at the edge of nowhere kind of thing, like away from society.
Right.
But then while they're there, strange things start happening, like electronics aren't working, like the internet, Wi-Fi, phone services, things are falling apart. Two strangers, G.H. Scott and his daughter, they appear at the door as the real owners of the house. And it's clear that things are going on in the world, and it's like they're trying to figure out what's going on, more or less, as they're like forced into this place of isolation.
It's a pretty good summary of the movie without revealing anything, so kudos on that point. It's almost like they show up and they give the worst Airbnb experience you can ever have. where the owners of the house start to intrude on the whole situation. Yeah.
Mm.
So, what did you think of the opener? Did you think that the opener was one that really got you invested? You have this character Amanda, and she goes, "Hey, honey, we're going on vacation for this weekend, far away, because I'm just pissed."
I'll be honest, it didn't really catch my attention. It was like, okay, like spur of the moment decision, and I didn't honestly believe. Like, I feel like of all the things to do, like, because you're pissed at society, like, I don't know. It feels like that's the weirdest reason to go on a vacation.
That's so funny. I feel like. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, it's more believable. Like, we haven't spent time together. Let's reconnect as a family, kind of thing. Like given other reasons, like kids are going to school or something. Like they could have given a dozen other reasons,
Uh
and it's
huh.
like I felt like those would have been more believable besides her reason. But then again, with that being said, it does give a little bit of insight into Amanda's character, that opening, where it's like she's kind of a selfish, self-serving person.
Yeah, and she really dislikes other people, especially when she can't control what's going on. You can tell
Mm-hmm.
right from the outset the way that she's just, oh, I set everything up, and oh, I'm being the loving wife, but also we're doing this, kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing is what you get the impression of right from the start. And so they set off her character pretty. They firmly establish her in like the first scene and establish the husband in a lot of ways too. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that it was a pretty solid scene. It wasn't anything that was just like over the moon. Oh, this is amazing. I wasn't thinking of
Mm-hmm.
some Mission Impossible where there's a gun to the head in the first scene kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
going on. No, that wasn't this. But it was, I thought, a great way to introduce the characters in a more natural environment, because this is an everyday type of universe that we're in. And the I guess I did resonate with the concept. I thought she graded against me as a character personally, but
Mm-hmm.
I I am the kind of guy that it's like, oh, I'm pissed. I will 100% just go out into the middle of nowhere and spend the weekend there. That's 100% something I'd love to do. So I appreciated that in its own way.
Okay.
They were kind of highfalutin in the house that they rented, so I don't know if I'd do that, but whatever. Um, Speaking of Amanda, did you think that she was a compellingly flawed main character? What did you think?
I didn't think she was super compelling, but I didn't think she was. But she was flawed. I mean, she was like, I don't know, like she was definitely this flawed character who was like the wife, the mother of this household. She
Mm-hmm.
wants to get away from everything. I didn't exactly. I mean, she's obviously this, and because she's such a selfish character in some ways, like even though, like even in the scenes in her family, it's like Clay has more like he's noticing the kid. He's like he's trying to keep the family together. He's kind of like this more empathetic character where he's trying to keep like do what's best for the family, take care of the
Right.
kids and that thing. So it's like you see him like looking out for everyone and like trying to I don't know, like he's trying to be a good father and husband. And like
Mm-hmm.
she more or less is doing bare minimum. Like I think the only thing I think she did for other people in that opening scene is like she got him cigarettes like or
Right.
something. Like it's the only
Yeah.
scene that was thing is like okay, it was just like because of how
Yeah.
much she was doing for herself. I was like, she didn't resonate. Like I didn't see a reason to root for her as a character. I guess it's like because of what she was doing. It's like, okay,
Yeah. She
like
is very much a Scrooge-ish type of character. That's
mhm.
interesting. Is there a way you would have done that if you were the one writing this story, right? Is there a way you would have maybe built her a little differently so that there was a little more of that empathy from the audience?
Probably established more like her perspective on life. Like maybe shown maybe a montage or a few scenes of like her life, workplace before the vacation. Like give us a
Hmm.
reason why she's pissed, I guess. Like give her like show us why she's upset at society so we can relate to her and understand why she's doing the spur of the moment vacation. Like maybe show some of that. Like you don't have to do a lot of time on that. Just like a few like a minute or half a
Hmm.
minute of montage clips just giving us an idea of what her life is and then that would help us relate a little bit more to her. Even if she is this selfish kind of character, it's like, okay, you understand why she's doing this, why she wants to get out from society.
Right. Yeah.
So, like, that would have done a whole lot for her character, I feel like, but they didn't do that. It just was like, you start with them leaving for vacation.
I mean, I personally like the idea of a despicable character
So,
being the
no,
main
I don't
character,
have a
but
problem with a despicable character being the main character. I just feel like if you're gonna make them compelling, like this movie as a
yeah,
whole didn't
yeah,
give me a whole lot of reason to root for her as a character. Like I had more
yeah.
reason to root for Clay, her husband, than for her. And I did like Clay's character a whole lot. Like he was
Mhm.
fully developed and like he's seriously trying, even though he knows he's like out of his element in some scenes.
No, I'd agree with that. I
Mhm.
think that you are right that they could have made her a more compelling or a more relatable main character. I think that
Mhm.
that's a worthy thing to note. Um,
Mhm.
are the side characters such as Clay and HG and all of those, are they compelling and have their own motives for being involved in this conflict?
I don't know. Like the side characters I felt were almost stock. Some of them. Like the daughter and the son felt like the typical stock like brother
Oh
sister
yeah.
like characters are like okay there isn't really a whole lot to differentiate them from other brother sisters in other movies and shows. It's like
Hmm.
like you see things about them but it's not like they're not unique or different as characters per se. I mean maybe Rose's obsession with the show Friends, but that's like the
Yeah.
only thing that
Yeah, Rose is the daughter. Yeah, that's a yeah, that was a
um
little silly, I thought, but
so I mean
because
GH
it was such
Scott
a plot point in the story too. Oh
yeah.
gosh. But yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, G.H. Scott, I was tempted to call him a main character because of his screen time, but he is really more of a side character. Um, he is developed. Like, he is a fully developed character, I'd say. But he's, like, but his motives are mysterious and unclear for a good section of the movie.
Right.
Where it's like, but I mean, in a way, it makes sense where it's like, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of mysteries. So it's more or less him kind of hiding some of his background, some of his the reasons why they're out there. It like it makes sense when he finally reveals it. It's like he's kind of scared. He's like, I don't. He doesn't exactly know what to say or what to believe or what is happening.
Yeah,
So, I mean, like he kind of has this. He is a fully fledged character in that regard because like he does have motive. He does have reason for doing what he does.
I'd agree. I think that there was a lot of really good, especially for HG, somewhat for Ruth,
Hmm.
uh, and for some of the other characters that aren't really side characters but simply pop up, such as Kevin Bacon or
Hmm.
the Spanish speaking lady who shows up for one scene. You know, they it's not certain what their involvement is and
Hmm.
why they're there. And so this makes them add a level of mystery and intrigue to the overall plot line,
Hmm.
that sets it off, I think, in the right direction at the beginning of the movie.
Hmm. Yeah.
I didn't really think of the kids when I was thinking of this, so that's a good point as well. The
Hmm.
setting. Did you think the setting was a believable setting? I mean, it's set in our world. Does that mean it's believable?
It should be. Honestly, there are several scenes in this movie, like towards the beginning, I was just like, wait a freaking second here. And it just was like, I mean, well, I'm not sure if this would count as the beginning, but when the oil tanker crashes on the beach, and they kind of say, oh, this nav system went faulty or whatever. And it was just was like, wait, hang on a second. That is a massive ship. I don't know much about boats and sailing, but for a
Right.
ship that size, you had to have at least a dozen people on that ship. And if something goes wrong like that, you had to have people who could do something, like to keep the boat from
Right.
crashing on the beach. It was like, it seemed absolutely unbelievable when I saw that scene. I was like, and that was their explanation. It's like, what? Hang on, that doesn't make any sense.
That's a really that's a good point. I think that I thought of many other situations that were more questionable.
Oh no,
Uh,
there's plenty of
I think
scenes that are questionable in this movie. Like that's not the only one. That was just the first one that came to mind because it's early on.
yeah, and I didn't even think of that one. Because I thought more of okay, the Teslas crashing, and then I think multiple upon multiple scenes of them having the main character is almost having a tunnel vision,
Hmm.
and then just barely seeing the thing in front of them, and then the camera would pan out, and you'd see this vast scene of destruction, and you would go, "Hold on." No one would have missed all the dead bodies when he pulled out this watch from the sand, or all of these crashed cars and the plumes of smoke coming out from the chaos here. Like, this is
Yeah.
just a little unbelievable on that point.
No, it was absolutely unbelievable. Like they were trying to frame these shots was like, oh, they're hiding things from the audience. Like, oh, you don't see this yet, and then you see it. Like you're supposed to see what the characters are seeing, and it's like the characters would not have missed this. Like they would have
Yeah,
seen that first before they saw that. And it just
yeah,
was like, okay, this it was just so stupid how they shot it and how they like presented the scenes. It was like, okay, it wasn't
yeah.
realistic at all. If anything, it made it laughable. It made it comedic, if anything. So
Yeah, there was a couple times where one or both of us did bust up laughing because it was a little odd.
yes,
And of course, I think there were some
and that
times
has
where,
nothing. And that has nothing to do, by the way, with the deer. Like the deer
yeah,
just added a whole nother layer of unbelievability to this movie, which is like, what? Why do we keep seeing
okay,
deer in this
interesting.
movie? Like, why do they keep showing up? Like,
Well,
there was
yeah,
no good explanation for that. It was like, and it had no bearing on the plot either. Like, it
well,
was just
okay, and
like,
that's something we'll get to in a minute. But that's 100%. That I think that's the biggest issue with this movie. But the just the explanation, the believability of the world,
mhm,
there was a sense in which they would provide some explanations, right? So I didn't cut it out completely and say, "Oh, the setting's completely unbelievable," because they
mhm,
tried to provide some explanation, right? And say, "Okay, this is why this exists in this universe." But
mhm,
you would look at some of those explanations and go, "That just doesn't make sense." Like, you
mhm.
have to be pretty hardcore conspiratorial to go, "Oh, the microwaves or whatever it was that was causing," and this is way later in the movie, but the microwaves that are causing the sun's teeth to fall out was so just out there that you're going, okay, I
Well, it
don't
was like
know
the
if you're
microwave radiation in the sound, which was like it was like they're trying to give this like strange explanation. I was like, wait, what? Like, oh,
yeah. It sounded like some QAnon conspiracy theory coming out in a movie as like a legitimate thing. I'm like, okay, this is not this just there is no I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense. But
mhm.
and maybe there's evidence out there that actually says these things are true. I don't know, but just the way they said it in these movies did not provide a solid framework for us to believe as an audience that this is actually how the universe works, especially because it's supposed to be set in our universe.
Yeah. No, it's supposed to be our world. It's supposed to be believable, and it doesn't like when you do things like that, and it doesn't logically follow. It's not believable anymore.
Well, I'm really curious to get to the middle of the movie, so I don't want to stick too much more on the beginning. But did you think that there was a compelling quote unquote villain in this movie?
So that's a good question, and I had trouble answering that for a little bit. Because the reality is, if there is a villain, they're never shown.
Right.
It's like whoever is organizing this chaos. Like it's implied that there is a villain causing the chaos around the world, like causing this like these uh isolation, destroying like hacking technology more or less. But it's never clear who these people are. Like it's implied, oh, it might be the country of Iran, it might be someone in the Middle East, terrorists, or it might be China, it might be Korea. It's
Right.
like it gives all these like possibilities, but it never settles on one. And it's like it's intentionally vague, even at the end of the movie. That's never answered who it is.
That's a good point that they never actually answer that.
Mm-hmm.
I know we haven't done a movies worth watching deep dive discussion on villains yet. I know we plan to
Mm-hmm.
at some point. We have touched briefly on it on different podcast episodes, but the idea of villains is generally they have some sort of relatable motivation that you can
Mm-hmm.
understand, or they go down this super deep, like mysterious, unknown evil type of thing is generally what you see. This moved more toward that second one with the unknown, mysterious evil, and it was almost like nature in some ways because so much of nature was in the chaos. So I almost tagged it as this is nature against them and them trying to survive in the midst of nature throwing all this chaos at them.
Mm.
And I was still kind of stuck with that at the end, even though you knew there was some malicious actor out there. But it was more of a general, almost you could say quasi, uh, like not religious, but like a quasi divine negative intervention in their life
Mm.
that they were just trying to deal with. Which kind of makes sense because this whole perspective is a apocalyptic scenario, right? Like a doomsday
Mm.
scenario. And
Yeah.
so it's told from their perspective. And at the end of the day, kind of what you said earlier, is we don't know who the evil that is causing this chaos is. And in a real world scenario, if we were in an apocalypse, would we know who the malicious actors actually were in this situation at the end? Probably not. So
Mm.
I didn't hate that they didn't explain that. And I
Mm.
thought that the
Well,
villain
I didn't either. I
idea.
didn't actually give it. I mean, I kind of just left it middle of the road for the villain
Uh
compelling
huh.
thing. I just was like, I mean, we didn't get like a full fledged villain, not something that's like relatable or given a reason why. But
Right.
it wasn't like the mystery wasn't bad. It just was like okay, like or for the scenario and story they were telling, it just was like okay, like we never know who it is. So
Well, and I just thought that was interesting because I don't
yeah.
usually when there's some sort of vague evil, whether that's Iron Man 3 or that's some other movie where there's a mysterious villain or, even the Dark Riders in the Lord of the Rings just have this aura about them of this mysterious, you don't know the evil here. Eventually that comes to light and you know the truth to some degree or another. In this case, you just don't know that, which I thought was interesting. But I don't know that it adds a lot to anyone who's not a movie critic.
I mean,
Like
well, okay,
I
actually,
feel like
I'll
I'm
be
the
on.
only person who will find that interesting in a
Okay,
good
actually, you
way.
just solidified something in my mind just now about this movie. This movie is good for people who like to think about certain things, who like to like analyze certain things, maybe even like conspiracy theories or something like that. Like, I mean, this would be a kind of movie that they would enjoy in a way. But for the
Mhm.
average moviegoer, like who isn't critical about this kind of thing, they're probably gonna be left confused by this movie. They're not gonna be like necessarily enjoy it. They're like, was the point of all that? I mean, that's
Yeah.
literally what they're
Oh,
gonna think.
that's so, dude. Because I even thought that.
Yeah.
And I like kind of like parts of it. Yeah. Okay, that's so true. Um, that's hilarious. Would you actually do something different with the villain, like, or with the enemy that they face? As much as I disliked it, I don't know that I would put my chips there in regards to what I would fix.
If all the things this movie needed changes in, I don't know if that was what it needed changes in. Like that was
Uh
not
huh.
the one point I would have changed. Like there would have been other things I would have changed maybe, but maybe I don't know. Like I would not have changed how the villains or whatever the like whatever it be nature or
Hmm.
some foreign bad actor. It I would not have changed necessarily that by much, maybe a little, but
No, and I think that's a pretty solid take.
mm,
The Amanda as a character, does she stand for an ideal, and is her goal in this movie something important for her?
it's hard to say. I mean, maybe she stands for her family, like pushing her
Hmm.
family, like maybe like the only thing I could come up with, and this was kind of Clay and Amanda's family together, was kind of this whole idea of like unity, maybe, or like they're kind of trying to stay
Hmm.
together throughout all this. Um, so like that was the only ideal that really pushed through if they stood for anything.
Well, and I thought of
So,
something similar. I almost extended it to the idea of like caring for the people outside of your family and
mm,
learning to like work together with other people might have been the message here. But even
mm,
that wasn't super clear, especially because I mean you have that little monologue at the end with Amanda and Ruth when they discuss like how much they hated each other or whatever, why you are so angry at people in the world and blah blah blah, and that
mm-hmm.
leads to some transformation. So I don't want to say there's nothing here, but it was a little a little weak on this point for
Yeah.
sure.
No, I agree. Like, I noted that, or was like, that was the only real character transformation we got in this movie was between Ruth and Amanda at the very end. Well, because they're both very harsh with each other, like antagonistic when they first meet.
Hmm.
And like over the course of the movie, they kind of change. Like, they don't change a whole lot. And it's like, as you said, it is very weak. But it's
Right.
like, that's the only transformation there is in this movie for character.
So if you watch the movie, the music as a whole sets a tone that this is a situation that is life threatening, right? At least everything in the movie is geared to make you feel like somebody's gonna die, right? So there is a sense in which that there is almost like a goal of, oh, she's going to save her family. And that is part of the conflict later in the movie. But at the beginning, she's just Amanda, the main character, is super pissed off that she's not getting her dream vacation. And that's
Mm.
what's important for her life. And as a motivation, I thought that was pretty pathetic, especially because even her own husband was like, hold on, this is a little too much. Let's be nice to these people who own the house we're staying in,
Mm.
all this stuff. So I think this is maybe one of those points where, like you said earlier, if they had brought in some other previous experiences with Amanda or something, some sort of montage that explained why she was such a bitter, angry woman, that would have made more sense. But it wasn't strong. So yeah, I don't know if you have more to say on that.
No, that's pretty much sums up what I was going to say.
Well, what did you think of the heightening the tension in the middle of the movie? Did they consistently throw the main characters in a worse situation as the story progresses?
I mean, because it's so unclear what's happening, it's hard to say that they are being put into a worse situation. It's
Mm-hmm.
like there was like more chaos is coming out. Like, you're just seeing more and more of the world like in chaos. Like, they gradually begin to realize what's happening. It's not like they're more in danger necessarily as the movie progresses. There are a few scenes where people like where upfront conflicts almost happen. Like, the only thing that like, I mean, obviously when the son's teeth start falling out and it's
Yeah.
like he's like
Uh-huh.
clearly sick with something, dude, like, that's the only scene where like someone's life is clearly like someone is health is at least on the line, maybe their life.
Yeah.
So I mean, that of course leads to the confrontation with Kevin Bacon's character, which I
Yeah.
forget his name. I think it's Danny.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and there are scenes where like I did like how they were cutting, like, the framing was awful. Like, there are certain
Uh-huh.
scenes, like the cutting back and forth between like different people, like while certain things were going on, it did create a certain sense of tension in certain scenes,
Mm-hmm.
even though you didn't know what was happening. In some of them, it was just like, okay, like it helped make things feel tense, like the way they
Right.
were cutting it back and forth. So, and they had that music playing in the background for those scenes. It was like, okay, like I did appreciate the way they cut that, even though how what it left us with was stupid in some of the cases. Uh,
Oh gosh. Yeah, there's gonna
so
be
I
a lot
mean,
of that sentiment. uh,
so
yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, this is one of those movies. Generally, I don't like talking about the cinematography because it doesn't generally play a whole lot into the story. In this case, the cutting, the music, all of that was very helpful in adding to the tension of this movie, which
mhm.
might speak very poorly about the plot line itself, but in this case, these other elements actually added to it in a very positive way, I want to say. Um yeah.
I did want to touch on one thing you mentioned about the music. I
Hmm.
do slightly disagree with you about some of it because some of the songs that were played at certain points in the movie just seemed random. It was almost like the director chose some of his playlist songs, especially towards the beginning of the movie.
His favorite hits.
His favorite songs just like played them at certain points. It's like, I don't know why you played this song here. Like, okay, it doesn't
Hmm.
feel cohesive with the rest of the movie. It,
Yeah, well, I wasn't thinking of that specifically. That's a fair point. I
Mhm.
was thinking more of the suspenseful music, which at
Yeah.
first is it feels extremely melodramatic at the beginning when they're playing this music and then they leave you without any fulfillment of that. And so you feel like they're building up to something. and it
Mm-hmm.
helped to add tension in a situation where there was none.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more of what I was referring to. But you're right. There
Okay.
was the weird music playlists that it's like a modern thing right now where you'll play popular music in these movies and people are like, "Oh, I know that song." Da 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 da, and that's not actually, I don't think it added anything to the movie. Unlike other movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, where it has a very specific, meaningful purpose to some degree, where it marks, in some ways, an era that the main character is going through,
Yeah.
and,
I mean,
and like marks their family and his relationship to his past and stuff like that. Like, that's
yeah.
very meaningful with the music and
Mhm.
also
Well, it's
fun.
part of his character in that movie,
Right.
where it's like the music, the songs played, like they establish like who they relate exactly to who Peter Quill is as a character. The songs in this movie, they don't exactly show any character development. They don't relate to any of the characters. It's just like background music for certain scenes, and it doesn't fit with everything else that's going on in the movie. Some of the
Yeah.
songs, it's just weird.
Yeah. There's no reason for Julia Roberts to be listening to this song. It doesn't do anything. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, so I would say this is the part of the movie that really stuck out to me as the biggest issue in my mind, just because there was so much of this, oh my goodness, something bad is happening, something bad is going to happen. Okay, this
Mhm.
bad thing, this generic bad thing will happen, such as a plane crashing or a boat running a on shore, or what do you call that? I'm missing the
Yeah,
word right now.
I
But
think it's just beaching itself.
yeah, so multiple of these generic terrible world events happening. You see a nuclear bomb go off in the distance, but there's nothing tangible that affects our main characters' lives, and that was more of where I got off the train, because this train was promising something bad, and then every time it was almost like nothing actually happened. And then
Mhm.
you have, little spoiler of spoilers, she puts the DVD of Friends in, finally gets to watch the last episode of Friends, and then it's over. And then I just sat there and was like, wait a second, so nothing bad actually happened. I mean, honestly, and so,
Yeah.
I was always waiting for that payoff. Okay,
Mhm.
so they're figuring it out. And it's weird because there's a strong tension between the characters, right? No one knows what's going on. You have HG and Clay and
I think it's
Amanda and
GH.
Ruth. Oh yeah, GH. You're right. Um, you got all these characters and they're in conflict with one another and they're like freaking out because they don't know what's going on. And GH has a gun and he's hiding it. Why does he have a gun? And all of these different things going on. And then at the end you're like, oh, they were all just really freaked out and nothing bad actually happened. And so you go, okay, what,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
nothing bad happened to them specifically. Like, it almost happened, but like, I guess you could say they almost got in a car crash with the Teslas,
Yeah.
and the son got sick.
But then they get him pills and he's fine.
Yeah, and then I guess the mom and Ruth almost get like attacked by deer.
Yeah, but then she didn't.
Yeah.
I wish they had stopped. Okay, never mind. But like, nothing actually bad happened in this movie, and so you
Mhm.
you go, okay, so they built up all of this tension, but there was never any payoff. And
Yeah.
that's where you go, okay, oh my goodness, something bad's gonna happen, something bad's gonna happen, something bad is gonna happen, and not only do you uh drop the floor out, but you also turn out all the lights. So they're plunging into darkness. That kind of concept of making it worse than you can imagine is what you really should be trying to do in these scenes. And it
Mhm.
was the opposite of that, where nothing happened at all. And so you were just consistently waiting for something to occur that never occurred.
Mhm.
I didn't love that. If you were writing this, how would you change that?
You're right. There should have been a payoff to the end. Like, there should have been like something bad should have happened. But
Hmm.
I don't know. It's like because of how this movie was played out. There's a part of me that's not even sure how I would like play it out believably. where it's just like, because I'd want to
Yeah.
rechange how things were done earlier on in the movie. So like I probably would introduce something later on, but I don't know what I would put in without knowing what I changed at the beginning. Because it's like
Mhm.
there are so many problems. Because like the movie builds, I mean, even though the movie builds on itself in a way where it's like it
Right.
does, like the scenes later on do build on what happened before. Some of it doesn't make sense, but it still builds on itself. And it's like
Uh-huh.
you have to kind of start at the beginning and rework it from the ground up.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking like how would I rework this movie. I just is like, okay, this is, I could see the problems and I know like what needs to change, but how would I change it? You would need to like give me a few hours to like rethink this whole movie and like.
Sure. That I think that's a fair point. I think
Mhm.
the only two things that I think of right off the bat that it's like, okay, you clearly missed an opportunity there is, let's just say, the Tesla situation, right? Even though I
Mhm.
thought that was really weird how they just happened to be either a lot of them are crashed, but then not all of them are crashed, and those ones just happen to be coming in at you like subway surfers. Like what are you, just dodging them? It was so. I think that's a scene where they promised that potentially, okay, a Tesla is going to crash this into the back of their car,
Mhm.
and if they had done that, and then the daughter gets really hurt or the son gets really hurt, and all of a sudden now they need to get to the hospital, that is a situation where this it got way worse.
Mhm.
They do have to raise the stakes. They have to find a situation out. And I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. They could have simply done that, and it would have made the movie way more interesting. I don't know how you would
Mhm.
resolve it at the end then, considering how they ended it, but
Mhm.
that would have instantly added actual stakes to the movie. the,
Mhm.
the other thing is that they should have done something with the animals. Like, they promised so much with the deer. They promised so much with all these random nature things going on. And also that shed where someone was sleeping on the ground. Why didn't you
Yeah.
just do something with that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, there were so many scenes where it's like you made a promise of some degree, a Chekhov's gun that you cocked and never went off, and
Yeah.
that was just waiting to happen, and it never happened. So I think they had a lot potentially there. They just never did anything
Mhm.
with it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is the other reason I'm having trouble thinking of how I'd rework it is because I think this movie did have a point. This movie did have a message per se, but and
Mhm.
how you would keep that message while also changing those parts of the movies. It's like I don't know how you would do that, but
Yeah. So just kind of going to that, what do you think that message was?
I mean, if you look at this movie as a whole, like you look at the conflicts, the characters, the interactions, and everything, it's clear that the the main ideas of this movie is that divisions and like conflicts lead to can escalate and become like civil war kind of situation where it's like
Hmm.
the idea is that if you're unified you won't like if you try to unify with other people you won't like go into conflict more or less. It's like I
Hmm.
guess like division can lead to destruction and civil war because that's the whole idea of the enemy is like this unknown villain is like they're playing on the isolation and fear of ordinary people. Whereas like they're
Right.
isolating everyone, they're spreading misinformation and like creating this scenario of like shock and like fear and like heightening everyone's like paranoia more or less, and then escalating it to the point where people just break into conflict with each other with people, and it's like where literally New York is being bombed and like people
Yeah.
are on the streets apparently fighting because you hear gunfire going off in the distance. So I
Yeah.
mean, like I feel like the point because of the reconciliation and like the scenes that take place, I feel like that was the main point of the movie. It was almost like they're trying to push this message through. Like that was the idea of this movie, but it was so poorly done because of what you like the scenes, how they did it. The storytelling was terrible at some points.
Right.
Um, I mean, the closest thing that came to mind is like this is almost like a Christian movie, like from a decade ago, where it's like they're just trying to push a message through, like without thought to the story.
I see it now that you said it. I
Mhm.
hadn't thought about that before. Um, yeah, that's interesting. It didn't strike me as obviously as it did you, but I do. It's very strong, so I see what you're saying with that because they're trying to reconcile with uh Danny or whatever the Kevin Bacon's character is, and they're also trying to reconcile with each other and make sure that they can make it through this and all of that kind of stuff. And there's clear claims that this person, especially with Ruth's character, where she goes, uh, what's his name? Clay is just a dirty man, and they just hate us because we're black, and all of these other things that were just clearly points of division. And GH was pretty much going like, let's try to reconcile through all of this, and then Clay gets on that boat too with Danny, and all of these things where it's a situation of let's try to be united in the middle of this chaos, which that's not a bad message, but it definitely is when you're so pointed on the message that everything else kind of is built to support that rather than to support the story, that makes it hard to buy the message.
Yeah.
Especially because, when we were watching, I don't know how you felt when the teeth started falling out, which is definitely the quote unquote worst thing that happens in this movie. But when I watched that, because nothing else bad had happened, there was a part of me that was given the impression that this was just thrown in there to add stakes when they didn't really have stakes. So I do get the idea that the message was being served by the plot rather than vice versa. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Like the whole teeth falling out thing was kind of just random. I mean, so many of the things in this movie was random. Like the deer constantly showing up, the threat of the deer in the final scene with Ruth and Amanda. Some of it was just random. Didn't make a whole lot of sense why it was there. Like it wasn't, and it wasn't like you could manipulate these things to like. I mean, the Tesla thing, the boat thing, I guess there was some explanation, like, okay, like hackers or something. But it just was like, how do you hack a deer? Like, how do you bring 100 deer to this one location? And, like, like it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it was a weird, vague, the radio waves or something are messing up the migration patterns of the deer. And that goes, okay, well, that still doesn't explain why you have hundreds of deer deciding they might want to trample these two random women in the woods.
Or even why they're all in this one location in particular, necessarily.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Was there any big revelations or surprise endings in this movie?
I mean, the only thing I could think of is G.H. Scott's revelation, like kind of his backstory, more or less. I mean, not his backstory, but it's like his like background with his client he mentions, where it's like who was like the guy from the Pentagon, and he mentions that they had this like defense like strategy, like when he realizes that because G.H. Scott clearly is the one who puts all of this together, where it's like, okay, like this is a intentional like a plot by someone to turn us against each other, to turn the U.S. into a Civil War battleground, to turn us against each other and weaken us.
Right.
So, like, he's the first person to kind of realize that, and it's like his backstory. He kind of has these like mini revelations throughout the movie, where it's like this is like almost like it's supposed to be evidence. The problem is some of the points he makes were almost laughably unbelievable, and some of them were almost like, okay, that was like it's a theory. It isn't necessarily solid fact. It's like I don't know, like it makes it hard to digest and say, yeah, that's a solid revelation or solid evidence for what you're saying.
Sure. Like, what are you thinking of specifically when you say that?
I mean, because they don't give it evidence for the villain. I guess that was the other thing. Like since they don't actually show the villain, it's hard to like pinpoint say this is what's happening. When the guy from the Pentagon, like when he mentions like his experience the day before coming to their house, or he talks to the guy over the phone, and he's like clearly like that's supposed to be like, oh, this is hint nod information. Like the guy from the Pentagon knows something, but instead of like trying to save the U.S. or anything, he's like fleeing the country or whatever. Right. And it's just very like, okay, why would that happen? for one thing.
Yeah, and I guess the other question is if the U.S. government knew ahead of time that they were going to be attacked, wouldn't they try to do something to stop it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where that's coming from now. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that too deeply either. Maybe I was just being naive.
So
Yeah. I
yeah,
didn't
I mean
really
that
feel
was.
like there was any big revelation in regards to that though, because
Mhm.
even though the enemy, you don't know who the enemy is, you still, in a pretty generic sense, based on the early on revelation that there's some sort of hacking going on, that there's some sort of enemy agent trying to cause chaos, if not war, in the United States. And so the fact that it's more organized and that it's against the government itself is not, I think, that much of a change from where we initially start off. I don't know. I didn't think it was that much of a world changer in regards to a revelation.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it wasn't like a strong revelation. It was almost like these mini revelations that were like they kind of changed the story a little bit, but not too much. And I was like, and they didn't have that much. Like they didn't have a lot of weight behind them. So it was like I don't know. There was supposed to be big revelations, but they really weren't.
Yeah,
So
no, I think that's a fair point.
also, and also his revelation about like his like insight into the stock market, like that whole scene was laughably stupid. It was just like
Oh my
I mean,
gosh, that's a
okay,
good
so you're
point.
telling me that if you
Uh,
are into the stock market, you can predict the future. Like that's essentially what he was saying. Like if you like
that's
follow
that's what people in
stocks,
the stock market like to think. Yeah.
yeah, like you can tell exactly when disasters and apocalypses are going to happen. And it's like, okay, like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense here.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people who make wrong bets on the stock market all the time.
Mm,
Yeah, I did not think that was, unless you have insider trading information, which in this case he kind of did with the Pentagon guy. You're
mm.
not going to know like that type of stuff. Yeah, unless we come up with much more complex models than we do currently. But
Yeah.
as of
I
now,
mean,
I
not that you
can't say
can't predict things. Okay, just because it's not like you can't predict things with the stock market or the economy. Like, sure, you can predict things with the market and the economy just by seeing the rise and fall of stocks. I agree with that part of it. But, and you can kind of tell, like, get a feel for that kind of thing. But to get a feel for, like, world events and, like, apocalypses and
right.
political things, like, you can't predict that. You can't predict when, like, a hurricane is going to come down on a country or not. That's, like, you can't guess that based on, like, the fallen Apple
Yeah,
stock. That makes no
right,
sense.
right. Yeah, that was a little silly. Did you think the movie left you satisfied? Did it leave you unsatisfied? What did you think?
I really wasn't satisfied with this movie. It just wasn't. Yeah, it just was like I wanted more answers. I wanted better
Mhm.
explanations than what they gave. And like you didn't tell me like I wanted you to tell me how these things happen, like better detail. But instead, we're given a bunch of theories and speculation about how these things happened, and it's like it just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to support the story that you told me.
Right. Yeah, no, I'd agree. What was it?
And I was like, and it almost was like they were trying to make it a happier ending by having her see the final episode of Friends in the bunker. Like she finds, I guess her finding the bunker, I guess, is a good thing because like okay, she could survive whatever apocalypse is coming, and it's implied that GH Clay. And the others are going to eventually come to the bunker too, because they mentioned the bunker. And Rosie and Amanda
Mhm.
are already looking for. I'm not Rosie and Amanda. Amanda and Ruth are already looking for Rose, so they're
Right.
nearby. So like they're all going to come to that bunker eventually soon.
Mhm.
So it's like they're almost like trying to portray this thing. Oh, they're going to be safe and fine now because they have a
Right.
safe spot.
But she
Which is
broke
like,
into a random person's house. A little 13-year-old girl just decides to break into some random house. I, that for me was more of a what are we doing here kind of thing. Especially
yeah.
because she didn't want to go anywhere without her brother earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, that was like a what are we doing here kind of thing.
I mean, you could argue like, why did she even leave? Like, it didn't make a whole lot of sense why she
Yeah,
left. Like,
early in
because
the
she's like,
morning,
like
it's
the
tough.
only reason she had for leaving was like because her internet wasn't working, so she couldn't see the last episode of Friends, and that was a big deal to her. So it's like she left to go find the last episode of Friends. It was like What?
And at this point, she knows we're like in apocalypse mode. Things are
Yeah.
going down, and she's singularly focused on finishing her show. That's so good. Oh my
My
gosh,
word.
in a
Yeah.
terrible way.
Uh,
Yeah, I thought so. What was it? 2012? Is that the Mayan? When the Mayan calendar went away, and they made that whole movie about
yeah.
hypothetically the world just falling apart. I
Yeah.
was kind of looking for that type of movie when I
Hmm.
first picked this one out. I thought, oh, this just came on Netflix. Looking forward to a world apocalypse disaster type of situation. And we pop in this movie, right? We're watching it. And at the end, I just felt cheated. A complete lack of payoff for the movie. Nothing bad actually happens. It's just so much could have been done and just nothing was done, and you just look at it like, okay, yeah, sure, you see
No.
nuclear bombs going off in the background, you see ships running aground, you see airplanes collapsing, or
Yeah.
crashing. Is Hypothetically, all these bad things are happening, but when you're watching a movie, you're following the story of characters, and in regards to the characters we were following, nothing bad actually happened to them. So, get some dentures for the boy and call it a day.
You know what? I almost feel like I need to redo my review and give it less points because it's like
Well, I mean, yeah,
4.5.
would you?
Like, I kind of feel like I would want to take away points from this movie now after our discussion. Like, I'm not sure it deserves a 4.
Uh-huh. Well, I do know that at the beginning I did give a couple things a little higher than they probably deserved, especially in regards to setting,
Mm-hmm.
in regards to side characters, things like that. So I definitely was going to take away probably about 0.3, which would
Mm-hmm.
just put it just below 4 points for me.
Okay.
So you did sway me a bit. This thing did not deserve four and a quarter. That's me signing off.
Okay.
And that's it. That's the pod. We
Yep.
hope all of you enjoyed this podcast review. Probably won't enjoy the movie. If you do, leave us a comment, like, and subscribe. We're back next week. We'll see you all then.